Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nick Up, the ADHD podcast. I'm Kyle. This is episode 5. Today, we're going to talk about medication. It's one of the things that gets discussed quite a lot if I'm having general chats with people about ADHD. And there's a lot of nonsense around it, I think, whether that's come from GPs that aren't trained in ADHD very well, or from all sorts of professionals. I'm talking purely from an experienced based position, and I can only give you my outlook on it and what's gone on for me and what's worked and not worked for me. So that's the first thing to probably touch on, is that everything is different for everybody. I could have another ADHDer that is on the same dose as me and so on, and it may not work. It may not work for them the way that it works for me. It may work in a different way, or it may not work at all. So that's one thing to consider in listening to this episode. Also, I want to make this kind of super clear, is that I'm not a medical professional. Okay, I'm not a medical professional. So, to start off, so talking about ADHD medication, we're obviously going to talk about what it does, what it doesn't do, and why so many people misunderstand it. I'm not going to speak philosophically or emotionally. I'm going to talk practically, because that's all I can go off. A lot of the conversation around ADHD medication it's either overly simplistic or completely wrong from my experience. Okay, I may keep saying in my opinion or in my experience, that's a given. Okay, like everything I'm saying is just, this applies to me, and I'm trying to give this out as advice for people to be able to resonate with. But that misunderstanding causes people they either avoid treatment that they might benefit from, or they sometimes expect things that medication was never designed to give them. The first thing probably that needs to be said clearly is this: that ADHD medication isn't just one thing. There's different classes of medication. So you have stimulants and non-stimulants. There's different release mechanisms, different doses, dosing strategies, and different outcomes depending on who you are. So the idea that ADHD medication as a whole is a single experience is one of the biggest reasons that people say things like, "Oh, I tried it and it didn't work." So in broader terms, there's two main stimulant classes used to treat ADHD. One's methylphenidate, or one methylphenidate based, and one's amphetamine based. There are non-stimulant options as well. Guanfacine, which I've tried previously alongside my medication, and clonidine, I believe, is another one. I'm not too familiar with others, but even with stimulants, there are immediate release and extended release formulations, so that matters for people more than they realize. Methylphenidate is often slower and, say, smoother in its delivery. That's commonly, I would say, is prescribed once daily in an extended release form. That was how I took it. Whereas amphetamine-based medications, they tend to be shorter acting and more direct, hard hitting, which is why some people like me, I take multiple doses across the day. But none of this is good or bad in isolation. It's about matching intensity, duration and timing to how your individual nervous system works. I hear a lot of people say that I tried ADHD medication and it didn't work. And what they usually mean is it didn't give them the outcome that they were expecting. But sometimes it comes from a belief that medication should feel motivating, euphoric, I suppose, or can lift you emotionally, I guess. And in reality, that's not what ADHD medication is designed to do. Because motivation doesn't come from medication. Discipline doesn't come from medication. And the biggest thing is identity definitely doesn't come from medication. What ADHD medication primarily does is reduce neurological friction in scientific terms. But in simple terms, it increases the availability of dopamine in key areas of your brain. There's parts of your brain, and I could go into all of that, but it's probably it may be a little too much to take in, but particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning, planning, impulse control, working, your memory, emotional regulation. And when those systems aren't doing what they're supposed to do or under functioning, everything feels harder than it should. But when they're supported, that's when the effort translates, I suppose, into outcome and outcomes that you desire. And that's why dosage and timing is so important. Because people often think that dosage is just about how much, but it isn't. It's about how long the medication lasts and how sharply it peaks, how smoothly it wears off, whether coverage matches the actual demands of your day, using it at specific times to get through specific things. In my case, a slow once a day release, that wasn't enough. It took too long to get to this peak, and I never got to that peak. I needed like a punch in the face, basically, to take the edge off of all of my intense symptoms and my brain not working how I wanted it and needed it to. So now I take multiple doses across the day because my medication lasts for around about 4.5 hours. But when that was adjusted properly, the difference wasn't like subtle, like it was incredible. And there's a lot of misunderstanding around that too. I think people interpret sedation or emotional flatness or being zombified as proof that medication's harmful for you. They say like you might have heard things like, oh, it made my child into a zombie and stuff like that. In reality, in probably, I want to say 99% of those experiences, they point to the wrong dose of medication or the wrong medication class. Like literally that the percentage is probably that high. If a stimulant makes someone drowsy, flattened, or just not engaged, then that doesn't mean that the stimulants are bad. It just means something needs working on, something needs adjusting. It's literally that simple. So if you're listening to this and you've tried ADHD medication before and it made you feel like shit, you were probably taking the wrong amount of medication or the wrong medication. If if the medication isn't working and you have a diagnosis, then it's just there's something wrong with the dosage and or the medication. It's not supposed to slow you down in the sense of suppressing you. It's supposed to bring you closer to a baseline. And I've spoken about baselines before. You know, you take like 3 levels is the way that I describe it, and you have level 1 would be external hyperactivity, you know, someone that's jumping all around the place going crazy. You have level 2, and that would be like a neurotypical brain or something similar to that, I suppose. I don't like the word normal, and I really try to refrain from using it, because what is normal, you know, that's a whole discussion that I could do a whole podcast on what normal is, what apparently. And then you have level 3, which would be internal hyperactivity, which is the form of ADHD that I have, and it presents in very strange ways. So when it comes to these levels of the levels that I use for my analogy of this, is that the ultimate goal is to get you as close to a neurotypical level or baseline as possible, right? Because a neurotypical brain can do the daily tasks easy and effortlessly the majority of the time, right? So if you can get yourself to that level, then it's a good place to be at, because we're going to be functioning like the people that we want to be functioning like. And what I've experienced, this medication doesn't discriminate. But without going off track, that's what the aim of the medication is to do. It's trying to get you to closer to a level where things like thoughts and emotions and behavior they are proportionate to reality. You know, they make sense to what we should be doing, I suppose, in this normalized whatever world that we're living in. Another major misconception is that medication should feel dramatic when it's working. I don't know whether I've explained how euphoric it was the first time I ever took medication, but it was up there with my children's births, but up there with one of the best days of my life. You know, it was incredible, or the best 8 hours of my life. Everything was just perfect, and it was insane. I've never experienced anything like that. The feelings were absolutely wild, how good it was. But to be able to live that way forever would be merely a hope and nothing else but a hope and a wish and a dream, because it was literally unbelievable. But yeah, early on you may notice like a sharp change, I suppose, especially if you've been living with severe symptoms. I was completely fucked. And when I say that, I don't mean it half-heartedly. I mean that I was fucked. I was finished. I was close to the end. I'm pretty sure of that. So my symptoms were, I don't even know the words to use for them. But that's not going to last, and it's not meant to last either. It's because over time, medication should just become quieter and less noticeable. It should just be like integrated into like you and your brain and how you work. A good way to tell whether medication's still working isn't like how it feels, but what happens when it wears off or is missed. Because for me, like, the signals are very clear. Like, every now and then I might get like a little bit of a creep of anxiety trying to like pop up. I get very irritable. People know this. I lose my trail of thought. I think I have difficulty regulating my emotional responses, at least. I think I have that full time, but because I get quite I can be quite snappy, unless it's towards my children, and my angels could never do anything wrong ever, not in a million years. But yeah, I can be quite snappy and quite abrupt, I suppose, with everyone else, and they aren't like dramatic crashes. I suppose they can be, and they have been, but they're more like subtle reminders of what my baseline should be. And that's when I know I better check my timer on my phone and see when my next medication dose is due. But missing a dose it's not catastrophic, it's not like the world's going to end. It doesn't cause a withdrawal, because ADHD stimulants, they're short acting. So, amphetamine based anyway. So if you miss a dose, what you usually experience is it's like a temporary return, I suppose, of old patterns. Not anything dangerous or irreversible. It's nothing like that. They normally last about 4.5 hours. So you see, if you're testing medication, again, this is amphetamine based. I'm unsure on methylphenidate because it's slow releasing. I don't think you'd be able to do the same sort of thing. It lasts longer. But amphetamine based medications, they're like short blasts. So that's why I take 3 doses a day. So like, if you take a medication say you take it in the morning, 9 a.m. let's say, by 1:30 it's going to be out of your system. So even if you're kind of worried or anxious about taking medication, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a bit of a rough, rocky 4.5 hours, or 3.5 hours really, medicated, because it takes around about an hour to start. So like, that's like probably your worst outcome. So like, my advice is obviously, if you are diagnosed and medicated, and or you have a medication prescription that you're a little worried to take, maybe, like, don't be worried about it. Like, I know that's easy to say. What my point is that I'm not trying to say like, don't worry about it and that's it. I'm saying, from my experience, okay, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Because if you're going to start taking ADHD medication, right, you've been at a stage, or you are at a stage where you feel like you need help, and you're going to try something that you haven't tried before to get help, because the things that you're doing aren't helping, and you can't cope with the way that you are currently coping or surviving, right? So dealing with those sorts of symptoms and emotions and feelings every single day, that becomes the norm. Yeah. So when you get a medication, right, if it's only going to last 4.5 hours, let's say, you're only going to feel the same way, maybe slightly worse, let's say, maybe, for 4.5 hours. And once that's done, once that 4.5 hours has passed, you're then going to be back to how you feel anyway, how you've been feeling. So when I say don't worry about it and don't panic, I mean that in every sense of it, is that there is nothing to panic about, and it can only get better, because it may get, okay, like I said, it may get slightly worse, but it's not going to be like cranked up 10 volumes and you're like out of control. Like, that's not going to happen. You're just going to probably, like, you could feel, if you have anxiety symptoms, you might feel a bit jittery and a bit, well, no, it's not a nice feeling that you would want to experience every day, which is where you're ultimately trying to get to if you have the same mentality as me. I'm not trying to become a superhuman. I'm not trying to be a world beater. I just wanted to feel okay and just be able to get through my days in a normal manner without having 5 panic attacks and thinking the world's going to end and fearing death and all sorts of crazy shit every single day. So yeah, if you are looking to try medication, obviously under the supervision of professionals, then please don't fear it. Embrace it, honestly. Like, run with it, sit with it, see if it works, see if you get like a almost like a numbing feeling in terms of like in your brain where things quieten for a little. Give it a go. That would be my advice, but only under the supervision of professionals, because I am not that. Okay, missing medication can be, obviously, yeah, it can be bad, but it's not, the majority of the time it's not the end of the world. The more important distinctions between like the tolerance and the normalization. Tolerance would mean that the medication no longer has effect and requires continual escalation to function at all. Okay, so I've tried to put that into reasonable terms to understand. But the normalization means that your nervous system has stabilized to a point where the absence of chaos feels ordinary. Okay, and that's what matters. That difference matters. I don't know if I can break that down into simpler terms, but the best way of saying it is that it's kind of become ingrained in you a bit. You can, like, I don't want to go as far as saying that you need it, because a lot of people don't like to have that sort of addiction and relying on something. But when your nervous system has got to that point where the absence of chaos, or all of the racing thoughts and all of the pressure is gone, and that feels ordinary, that's where, that's the difference that matters, because that's the place you want to be at, right? You want to have you want things to be as normal as possible, and you want that feeling of chaos out of your head, and to be able to have some peace. That was all I ever wanted. That's what matters. So another fear that people have is the dependence, which I just touched on, but the idea of relying on medication, that somehow undermines self-trust or autonomy. In my experience, the opposite's true. Medication doesn't replace judgment; it enables it. That's how I see things. Without it, I trusted myself less. Without medication, not more. I didn't trust myself more because my reactions were inconsistent, and they were 99%, if not 100%, driven by anxiety or just being impulsive. With the medication, I can think, I can pause, I can act deliberately, which is a huge thing. And that increases self-trust. It's not that you're now dependent on it, and things can't get any better if you don't take it. For example, a concept that I come back to repeatedly is what I call the extra second. And I've touched on it previously, but I went through my diagnosis phase, and my neurologist said that she was going to change my life. And I was like, please don't say that to me, because I've been told this so many times. I ended up getting upset, I ended up getting emotional, and we went over it again, and she said, right, okay, let me take that back, and let me just say that I'm going to give you an extra second to think. And at the time I thought, you are taking the piss, surely. Like, you just told me you're going to change my life, and now you're telling me you're going to give me an extra second to think. Like, the distinction between the both is huge. I'm thinking, no way. So that extra second that I was promised and I got changed my life. That's the reality. But what medication did, it gives me like a pause, like the majority of the time. This is as long as I'm medicated. I get like a moment of space between stimulus and reaction, I suppose, where I'm about to do something and then doing it. And in a calm brain, you're not really going to notice it so much. Like you won't, it's kind of just there. You get that bit of extra time to think. The neurotypical person won't, if someone speaks to them badly, they may not enjoy it, they may not want them to, but they can have that second to go, okay, maybe they're angry, maybe they're this, maybe they're that, whatever, and walk away. Whereas an ADHD brain, or mine in particular, would be like, what the fuck, get into it with them straight away. So in a calm brain, you can kind of forget about it. You don't really need it. But in a chaotic brain, it transforms everything. Literally changes everything. That second's where things like panic and panic attacks can be interrupted, and where like your impulsiveness you can question it sometimes. I want to make it clear that this isn't all the time. This is, these things that over time, repetition may allow it to be constant, but immediately I don't want to give people the wrong impression that this is what's going to happen straight away. For me, I was quite lucky, and it did change things for me straight away. But these sorts of things where like interrupting panic and or like trails of thought and impulsivity can be sort of paused, I suppose. That come over time. It took a period of time to get to that place, and it's good because it's where decisions become choices instead of reactions. That's how I see it. Is that my decisions are now my choice rather than just boom, I'm doing it. And I know that a lot of people can relate with that. A lot of people, because me and numerous people I've spoken to about this podcast, they've given me feedback and stuff. That's something that we've spoken about. And that's not medication acting instead of me. The medication creates conditions for me to act. Okay, so that's something important to understand. People have this thing of this theory, medications made you who you are. Like, that's bullshit. The medication's making things easier for me. That's what it's doing. And it also explains why ADHD medication can, I don't want to say stop, but at least reduce anxiety for some people. Because in cases where anxiety is driven by constant internal hyperactivity, like me, the racing thoughts, the overstimulation, the inability to regulate your internal state, and treating the ADHD reduces that downstream anxiety. And that doesn't mean that all anxiety is ADHD, by the way. And it doesn't mean that ADHD medication treats anxiety directly either, because that's not correct. Okay. It means that in some people, anxiety is a symptom of untreated ADHD rather than a standalone condition. Right? And this distinction is critical. It's the one reason misdiagnosis is so common. Right? But at the same time, medication does not fix everything. Okay? It doesn't erase impulsivity. It doesn't cure rejection sensitivity, or what I've been referring to as RSD, and it doesn't eliminate addictive tendencies either. Okay, those patterns they often predate medication, and they require separate work. The mistake people make is blaming medication for not doing what it was never designed to do. So it's not there to make you... ADHD medication isn't going to make you invincible. TikTok will probably tell you that. It's there to make effort possible. I think about ADHD medication the same way I think about like a personal assistant and or a personal trainer, because it supports you, it guides you, it reduces friction. But if you don't engage or put effort in, then nothing changes. You could literally have the best personal trainer in the world, but if you don't move, you ain't going to get any better or anything, are you? And that's why honesty with prescribers is non-negotiable. Filtering symptoms, hiding behavior, or like downplaying struggles, that does not protect you. It literally compromises everything. Doctors can only work with what they're given. Inconsistent or inaccurate information, that's going to lead to the wrong medication, probably, but definitely not better outcomes. Long-term use is another area which dominates reason. For me, the question isn't what if I'm on this forever. The question is, what is my quality of life about it? Because if something allows me to function and to think clearly, to regulate my emotions and to live well, then longevity matters less than presence. I'm alive now and I'm functioning now. If in 20 years I'm fucked, I guess I had a good 20 years where I was able to live, because for the previous 20 odd years, or whatever it may have been, my adult life, beginning of my adult life, I was fucked. I was completely fucked. I was in a horrendous state. No matter how well and happy I ever looked, I was fucked completely. So I've not done much research into the long-term effects, and I don't know how much research there is into it, but I've not done much into it because that side of it doesn't really interest me. I'm interested in how I'm alive, and I'm extremely grateful to be alive. I try to show gratitude where possible, in every way. So how I'm living and how I was previously are two completely separate things. The difference is so big, and I am so happy and privileged to be able to live how I do now. And just even doing something like this right now, this would have been impossible. Literally, like, the difference is like there isn't any like real words for it, to be honest. So yeah, if it's going to allow me to live better, then that's what I'm trying to do, But when it comes to ADHD medication as a whole, I've obviously done a little. I don't really know how long this has gone on for, but the one thing I would want people to take away from this is that dosage is everything, okay? And with dosage comes timing, and timing changes your outcomes. All right, so you get the dosage right, because then you're not going through this whole zombie phase. And then you get the timing right of the dosage. And the reason I say that timing changes outcomes is because that's when you'll get the extra second. When you get the dosage and the timing right, you're going to then get that extra second, which is going to change the outcomes of your life. Okay, that is my opinion, and from my experience, I have to make that clear. But when the diagnosis is correct and medication is properly adjusted, ADHD medication doesn't suppress you, sedate you, or change who you are. It literally supports you. It doesn't replace effort. It makes effort count. That's the reason it exists, in my opinion. That's what it's for. First of all, the way that I personally understand ADHD medication is the way that I've experienced it and the way that it's been explained to me by my neurologist. So for me, the way that it's been explained to me is that it's no different for insulin for a type 2 diabetic. And that comparison isn't dramatic, and it's not rhetorical, it's functional. Okay, if someone is diabetic, we don't debate whether they're relying on insulin, and we don't question whether insulin is changing who they are. We don't tell them to try harder without it, do we? Okay, we accept that their body doesn't regulate something properly, and insulin brings them closer to the baseline that they need to be at. In my case, ADHD medication does the exact same thing, because without it, my nervous system does not regulate itself in a way that allows me to function safely or consistently. But with it, I can operate at something closer to a normal baseline. And that's not a crutch, that's treatment. And I have another comparison, actually, and this matters just as much, right? If you had a severe accident, and God willing you don't, nothing happens to to anybody ever, but people do have these situations, okay? But if you was to have a severe accident and you lost the ability to walk and talk properly, let's say, would you refuse physiotherapy because it might change you? Or would you go through rehab, the discomfort and the hard work to get to a place where life is functional again, or even better than it was before? I guess that is rhetorical, isn't it? Because we all know the answer. Of course you would. And neuroplasticity works in the exact same way, okay? If your brain has spent decades wiring itself around anxiety, impulsivity, chaos, survival, all of these things, then there's a tool that you can use to rewire those patterns, but in an accelerated manner. Why would you ever ignore it? Like, why? Is it because you're comfortable with where you're at now? Is it because you don't want things to be better? I don't quite get it when people say that about it. They don't want to take medication. It does puzzle me, especially when their life isn't how they want it to be. So medication in that sense, it isn't recovery, it's the physiotherapy that makes the recovery possible. You still have to do the work and you still have to show up. But without the support, the work may never stick. Another part to touch on is that this is actually really important, because medication does not cure addiction, doesn't cure impulsivity or emotional dysregulation. It does not do that. If it did, we wouldn't have addicts in the world, and we would just give everyone ADHD medication and all of their problems would disappear forever. There wouldn't be drug addicts anywhere, would there? Just there you go, take this, and you won't have an addiction anymore. So I touch on that because of the gambling addiction that I've had and have, and I cope with and try to manage in the best way possible. The facts are that those behaviors, they existed before medication. So they're learned patterns, coping strategies, neurological traits, and they don't magically vanish. That's not how things work. Medication can support you in managing them, and it can, I guess, reduce in intensity, and it can also give you a bit of space to intervene, but it doesn't erase responsibility, and it does not make you immune. All right, it's dangerous to believe that. Very dangerous. When people expect medication to fix everything, it generally doesn't, and I don't believe that that's how medication works. But I believe that that's why people give up early, or they blame the medication. And that's not really the point of it. Medication's there to help you help yourself. The way that I think about it is literally like this. So if I had a personal assistant and a personal trainer, right? It shows up every day, it supports me, and it gives me structure and some guidance, yeah? But if I don't engage with that, then nothing changes, right? You can have a personal trainer, the best personal trainer in the world. You can have them 7 days a week. But if you don't move, how on earth are you going to get any better? How? Finally, this is the part that I want people to really sit with, because taking medication doesn't mean you stop working on yourself. It means that the work finally becomes possible. Okay? It doesn't make you invincible. It does not make you perfect. And it does not remove accountability. What it does, when it's the right medication, at the right dose, at the right time is give you a fair chance. And for some of us, especially for me, that fair chance was the difference between surviving and actually living. And I don't know how long or how much survival I had left in me. But now it doesn't even matter, because I've managed to make the progress that I needed to make in order to get to the position I'm in now and be able to function how I am. That's the end of the show, and I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that it's helped you understand things a little clearer. As I always say, reach out on my socials if you need to talk or ask anything. That's what I'm here for. Take it easy.